Good morning, team. I think we're live. Just going to check we're in the right place. How are you all doing out there? Just looking at my phone to make sure that we're in the right place and up and live. So, Monday morning here. I know for some of you it will still be Sunday, depending on where you are in the world, but thank you for taking the time to hang out. I'm really excited to do this together. So basically, what I want to talk about, or what I thought we could get into, was just basically to have a conversation, like a series of conversations around something that I've called, or a topic that I've kind of coined, which is transformational horsemanship. Good morning, Nan. Nan from Tasmania. I hope it's glorious there. And this is a topic that's been really, or it's a concept really that's been coming up for me time and time again over the past 12 months. And it's really revolutionized the way that I've come to think about my horsemanship and the way that I work with my horses, and actually the work that I'm doing full stop. And so there's a number of things that kind of relate to it that I thought we could discuss. And so over the next couple of weeks, I've booked in this time of day for us to get together and have a chat. And we're going to go through a series of a whole different lot of topics. So we've got the 4 intelligences to look at, which is how we need to actually be paying attention to all different parts of ourselves, as opposed to just the logical and very thought-based part, which most of us really get into. Good morning, Dory. Good morning, Cindy. So let's take it from the top. My head is slightly foggy this morning. I've had this horrible cold the last week, and so I'm just kind of emerging out of that fog. So you'll have to bear with me if my voice is slightly croaky too. Hi, Lisa. So basically, I was having a conversation. This is a really good way of describing it. Last week, I was working with someone one-on-one, and she's such a fabulous person and really, invested in her horses. And the way that she describes herself is very much a type A personality, very logical, likes to have things in order, really likes to tick things off her list and get things done. So very results oriented. And she's just come into relationship or come into partnership with this new horse, which has been a really enriching and incredible experience for her. And so we were talking about that, and she's like, I've got 3 horses now. I've got this one horse, which is her new mare, that everything is going so well, and they're competing together, and there's a really great synergy between them. So basically there's a lot of ease there because their personalities are very complementary, and what she's able to bring to the equation obviously fits really well with what that horse needs. So it's very easy for those two to have this lovely relationship together. And then she has she also has 2 other horses, and one of them is slightly more difficult in what you would describe in terms of how they are as a partnership. So the qualities that he requires of her don't come quite so easily, and she's finding that relationship a lot more challenging. And then she has this 3rd horse, which isn't her horse, where the initial intention for getting together and actually doing things was to improve her riding. So it wasn't so much about developing a relationship with the horse. It wasn't so much that they were going to get out there and do things together in terms of how you would see things progress if you owned the horse yourself necessarily. She was really going there to ride this horse for the sake of improving her riding. Completely fine. So we were having this conversation, and she's like, what I'm realizing now is I'm finding the relationship or the experience that I'm having with these 2 other horses to be really dissatisfactory. And I don't know why that's the case. It used to be that I would be feeling a sense of achievement, or I would be really satisfied with what it was that was happening when I got out there and rode these other 2 horses. But now, having had this experience with my other horse where there's a connection, and that's how she described it, there's a connection. The other 2, the other riding experiences that I'm having just seem really below par. They're not really doing it for me. And to me, this was the perfect example of that transformational horsemanship and the transactional horsemanship model, which is what we're going to get into now. And this is exactly what I talked about with her last week. So transformational horsemanship is really where you are involved in the process of looking to yourself first, where you're engaged with your horses, but you realize there's something beyond that that's actually happening while you are going through the process of becoming better in whatever way that fits or is relevant for you. And I think the thing to recognize about horses and sports and riding and anything really which we involve ourselves in, which we might describe as a passion or even a hobby, is that it can be a transformational process. Horse riding, horsemanship, horse competition, anything which you really choose to do with a horse can be a transformational experience. However, it's not inherently transformational. It's possible to also engage and ride horses in a purely transactional way. And we see this happen all the time. And what I mean by transactional is you ride your horse in order to achieve a certain result. So there's not so much focus, there's not attention that's paid to, there's not a level of mindfulness that is around the fact that the relationship is first and foremost. You're going out there to really put in place a series of things that need to be put in place in order for you to get this thing done. So we can see examples of transactional horsemanship all the time. In competition, this is where shortcuts start to be taken. This is where we start to look for different ways of achieving a result that may be to the detriment of ourselves and to the detriment of our horses. And transformational horsemanship on the other side of the coin is really where we're all about process, where we're not forgoing results, and it's not that results are secondary to actually engaging in a process or engaging in a relationship where connection and where that mindfulness about how it is for both of you is important. It's just that it's a much more enduring, a much more sustaining, and a much more far-reaching way of engaging with our horses, and ultimately a lot more enriching. So let me have a look at what the comments are. Hi, Katie. Yay. Hi, Del. So Ella's saying as well, which is so true, like it's often this transformational experience that we engage in or that we really recognize when we are involved with our horses is happening without us even being aware of it. So potentially we've started from a place where we have been really transactional about how we are approaching things. We want to do this, or we want to get better at this, or we want to win this or do this particular thing. And then as we go through the process and as we peel away the layers, we realize that in order to really get to that, achieve that connection, or really get that result in a way that is enriching for both ourselves and our horses. So where we're not compromising any of our values, where we're not, letting ourselves down ultimately, we have to turn to ourselves first. Hi, Kendall. So when I know this is not necessarily new information, but the way of framing it for me, framing it in these two camps, I guess, has been really enlightening in terms of how it is that I'm approaching my own horsemanship, how it is I'm approaching my own riding and interactions, but also how it is I am going about producing the material that I'm producing for my membership program, Joyride, about the conversations that I'm having with people, and really the motivation that I have for doing the work that I do. Now, I'm not here to kind of preach on a platform of what it is I'm teaching and all of that sort of thing, but I do find it really interesting in that a lot of conversations that I have with people, especially in my membership program, are, we came to learn about how to be less nervous or how to be more confident or how to get on top of our anxiety with our horses. But the effect of this is actually trickling through to our lives. And for me, this is the absolute blessing and gift that horses give us. They give us this gift of transformation. And when you can really understand that you are the key to really being able to create the connection and relationship you want, then you really put yourself in the driving seat, because at that point you can decide how it is that you want to be, you know, what it is you need to practice and what it is you need to engage yourself in to really get the most out of yourself, so that you are in a position to also liberate your horse to get the best out of them while they're in relationship with you. The satisfaction, I guess, as a coach as well has come from really working with the many of you who are dedicated to this process as well. And I thank you so much for that, because I have had experiences where I have coached people in transactional relationships, you know, where they're like, I want this, I want to achieve this result, this is how we're going to do this. And that's absolutely possible. However, it limits you to a point. And I think this is where the artistry of horsemanship comes in, where we really recognize the difference between a rider and a horseman, you know, and a horseman has that intangible thing, that quality or that energy that you can really only describe as connection. There's a connection between them and their horse. And while you can be successful up until to a point, an eye who will be watching someone who has really developed that connection and developed that level of artistry, that is a quality that is unable to be emulated if you are only in the process of seeking a result. And so for me, it has become a non-negotiable element of how it is I'm moving forward. Really, I'm about the relationship. I'm about the connection. And that connection and that relationship is what liberates you to get the best out of yourself and really takes you to a whole new level. So this is what we're going to explore over the next couple of weeks, because I think it's really such an exciting topic and something that the more you become attuned to it and the more you develop your awareness around it, the sky is really the limit, because it becomes about the details, you know, it becomes about the daily practice, and it becomes about the feedback that you get as a result of constant engagement with your horse and realizing how it is you need to tune your emotional dials in order to be able to commune with them in the most effective way possible, you know, in a way that does you both the biggest service, I guess. Hi, Kay. Hi from Mudgee. I love Mudgee. Noreen, yay. Hi from Ireland. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love Joyride. It's such a cool place to be. So what does that mean? Like, what does it mean? How do we actually get to that place where we are working in a way that is for the benefit of both of us? That's something else that I want to flag up, is when we get really results focused, we can look for the shortest route, you know, because it detracts our attention away from the process. It detracts our attention away from mastery or learning or being really willing to put yourself in a place where perhaps you feel uncomfortable or perhaps you aren't actually able to produce a result immediately. And as a result of that, when you're looking purely for the result, then you start to go for the shortcuts. You know, it doesn't always, in order to achieve a certain thing, it doesn't always mean that you need to understand that thing fully, or that you have really put yourself in a position where you and your horse have mastered a certain way of being. It just means that for that moment in time, you've been able to produce that result. So the transformational approach is, again, really practice oriented. It's really process oriented. And I'm going to talk more about this tomorrow, but it's really been the shift for me away from a goal-centered way of thinking and towards a much more process-oriented way of thinking, to the extent where I've done away with goals altogether. Now, first up, you might be thinking, well, how can you do away with goals? That's crazy. And, you know, it doesn't mean that because we're interested in relationship or connection or partnership that we're no longer interested in a result. And I completely agree. But what I will say is that the more process-oriented you become and the more interested and invested you become in seeking that transformation within yourself and within your horses, the more results you will experience. It's actually a way of optimizing your results and ensuring really that you aren't putting the onus for practice and for really being able to get what it is that you are looking to get on someone else. You know, you really remove yourself from the ability to manufacture excuses as soon as you put the practice and the onus of, what's the word that I'm looking for? I don't know, I keep using the word transformation, but we're kind of overdoing that now. As soon as basically you look to yourself for what it is that's happening, that's really where I want to go. So a process-oriented approach to me becomes about what it is that you're doing, but also what it is that you're being. And as soon as we start to get fixated on a result, and goals are very results-oriented, we lose that focus. We lose the ability to actually step into a practice every day and say, what is it that I want to embody at this particular time in order for me to be the person, to be the rider, and to be the horse person that I need to be in order for me to realize that dream. Now, it might seem like semantics, but this is a really big shift. Once we set a goal, we set our focus and our direction towards a future point. And that point comes from lack. It comes from this feeling that we don't have what it is that we need to or want to or should have. And so that becomes the goal. And when we set that goal, we create a gap. We create a space between where it is that we are now and where it is that we would like to be. Now, when we do that, we have two options. We can either focus then or use that goal as a way to actually outline the process that we need to take to get towards that point. And really, in order for that process to be effective, we actually need to detach from the goal and just focus on the day-to-day. Or, which is the more common experience that I've come across, we actually remain focused on the goal and then we feel inadequate in the place that we're at, and we feel a growing sense of frustration when things aren't going as well as perhaps we would like them to be within the time frame that we've actually set for ourselves. Now, this sets us up in a number of ways, which I'm going to talk again more about tomorrow, but basically it challenges our sense of worthiness, which again compounds this negative belief cycle, which automatically impacts our ability to really produce a result and a practice that leads us to where it is that we want to go. But ultimately, it distracts us. It distracts us from the practice of being who it is we need to do and doing what it is we need to do right now. So I've shifted that focus away from that result and towards a very process-oriented practice. And that comes with really identifying what your dream is. And your dream is something that is intrinsically motivated. It's not something that comes from the outside of yourself that you feel, that's kind of like an arbitrary external goal. It's more about what is it that I want to be and who is it that I want to embody within this relationship with my horse. And then what is the smallest version of that? So we boil that down to your mission, which is basically like the defined daily practice of your dream. And from that place, we set about really understanding what is it that I need to practice now? What is it that I need to embody now? What is it that I need to do on a daily basis that actually allows me to do what it is that I need to do and be who I want to be now, rather than moving towards this point where I'm going to fulfill that in the future? So let's have a look at the comments. You need to be comfortable with learning to praise yourself for even the try. Yeah, absolutely. Goals, when we set them, most of the time some type of tangible proof that you've accomplished something. Yeah, and that's a really important point as well. Like the tripwire that often happens with goals is we set them to a fixed time frame, and when we're unable to produce that result within that time frame that we've set, instead of actually seeing it as a failure of process or a failure of practice, or perhaps even really just needing to adjust the goal, we see it as a failure of self. And that's where the sense of despondency, the lack of motivation, and a sense of shame even, that can be a really huge part of the goal setting process and can prevent you from really wanting to put yourself out there in the future and keep setting goals that actually allow you to progress in a way that is sustainable and viable. So, okay, shouldn't we discard timeframes? They cause stress and frustration. Yeah, to an extent, it's a really, I don't know that there's any completely right or wrong answer for this in terms of timeframes. Like, it's definitely we're obviously in this, where's my computer gone? There we go. We're in this very unique position where we are in partnership with another creature, an animal that has their own sense, you know, their own needs, wants, and desires in the moment. And so on any given day, it's obvious that our needs, wants, and desires are not always going to match up with theirs. And so we have to be considerate of that and fluid within that framework, so that we say, we're moving towards this point, but this is the process that we're engaging in. And I think when you step away from that goal-based, very delineated framework, that's where you're much more liberated by time, because you set yourself up with a success model that is actually completely and 100% within your frame of influence and control. The problem with goals, especially when we have a time frame attached to them, is often it's completely outside of our control and influence. And even if we exert everything that we can to be, you know, working in accordance with that, sometimes it's just not possible. And so switching the mindset around, switching the way that we approach things around from a very goal-based approach to a more practice-based approach means that we're always taking what it is that we have and working within a framework that is 100% within our control. And so my new success mantra, if you like, is doing what I can, when I can, with what I've got. And if I do that, I'm always successful because A, I'm not looking to someone else to start what it is I need to start or do what it is I need to do. And I'm always able to practice the qualities that I want to practice at any given time that aren't focused on producing a result. They're focused on me embodying a quality that is what is necessary for me to embody to maximize my chances of producing a result. I think this is the flip around. Really, a goal is never completely within your control and influence. You know, asking your horse to do something is never completely within your control and influence in terms of being able to produce that specific result. But what you can do is pay attention to the different pieces of the puzzle that maximize our chances of producing that result. And that is always the practice and the process. For me, this has been so liberating. And I know that in Joyride, in my membership program, this is something that we have really only been seriously paying attention to in the last week or so when I've launched these new pathways. You know, the all-in pathway has been a real switch around from this goal approach to this practice approach. And I've always been process oriented, but this is like 100%. We're like, let's let go of these kind of rigid frameworks for ourselves and really embody the practice and the process instead. And so for me, it's like when I wake up or when I go out with my horses, I'm like, who is it that I need to be today in order to be the person that my horse needs? And that might be, you know, I need to be really patient. I need to be really, I need to be calm, and I need to be brave. That might be the three elements that I choose. And so as I'm out there, if I keep those as an intentional anchor, then that really informs how it is I go about things. You know, if I'm wanting to practice kindness, if I'm wanting to practice patience, if I'm wanting to practice bravery, then that really allows me to create a whole different atmosphere around how it is I'm going about things that keep those things in the forefront of my mind. And then from there, I can start to really develop different ways of integrating the different parts of myself, so that when I'm really, you know, I'm in this fluid space where I'm receptive to what it is they need, and I don't take that as a personal affront. It's just like, this is really interesting information that you're giving me. How is it that I can approach this in the most open and curious way, so that we can navigate our way through this water towards the next stage, rather than saying, today I've got here and I need to produce this result and this is going to happen. I've got 20 minutes. Let's do this. And so ironically, even though you feel like the focus on the result is what's going to maximize the result, it actually moves you further away from it, because you've got one eye on this place, which is actually the outcome. And in order to produce that outcome, all you need to focus on is process and practice. So that's really what it comes down to for me. I'm going to be repeating those words quite a lot. Hey, Nikki, good morning. So the other element that's really become apparent is that while we're in a really results orientated or a really transactional space, we are always, well, not always, it's a very linear projection that happens as a result of that. Yeah. So when you're results orientated, when you're transaction orientated, so I'm riding my horse in order to produce this result, then it's a very logical, linear, straight process. Yeah. That generally, that fits with the type A way of going about things. Like, let's produce a list, let's tick the list off, let's do these things, point by point. Now, it's not that that isn't important. It's just that it's not more important than cultivating our emotional intelligence. It's not more important than our intuitive intelligence. And it's not more important than our physical intelligence. And what I've noticed, especially over the last 12 months, and this has really been kind of a thesis or like an area of study that I've been getting into using myself as an experiment and in conversation with the amazing writers that I work with, is that we have really been trained out of our emotional and our intuitive intelligence. And goal setting or developing a really results oriented or transactional approach to writing ticks the boxes for that linear way of thinking, for that type A way of thinking. But what we all know is that really, in order to get to that stage where things develop to a level of artistry, where there's beauty and there's connection and there's that thing where you're like, wow, look at them, isn't that beautiful? We know that there's an intuitive connection, that there's an emotional connection. And these are things which have to be focused on and developed, and which for the most part have been left out of conversations up until this point, I feel. And so where I've taken things and where the courses that I've been creating have really been focusing on as well is, it's not that our logical mind and it's not that our rational mind isn't important. It's just that we also need to understand, well, how is it that we are recognizing and processing feelings when we're out there working with our horses? How is it that we're allowing insight to come in? Are we even allowing insight to come in? And how is it that we're translating thought-based, understanding and messages into actual physical action? One of the most common scenarios that comes up is overthinking. Us getting stuck in this place of actually being really heady about things and spinning around in circles on ourselves. And that's a classic symptom of an overdeveloped logical intelligence at the expense of the other intelligences. When we are working as an integrated whole, when we're really operating with the 4 different quadrants healthily, in connection, and those 4 different quadrants are our intuitive intelligence, our emotional intelligence, our physical intelligence, and our actual intellectual intelligence, then we have this beautiful place where we can feed into all of those parts of ourselves and work in a really dynamic union with our horses, because they have all of those parts in place without needing to be actually worked on. So our logical intelligence, when we're stuck in that thought-based place, we actually don't take thoughts and translate them into action. So they spin around on themselves. And when we're gifted with insight from something else, that flash of understanding about what something might mean, we squash it down because it doesn't seem to make rational sense. We haven't been allowed to actually cultivate that side of ourselves and pay attention to it. And so we learn to really ignore those intuitive messages or those gut feelings. And how many times have you had a conversation with yourself or a conversation with someone else where they go, I kind of knew, but I ignored it, or I knew it in my gut and I just didn't pay attention. We didn't pay attention because we haven't been taught to pay attention. We didn't pay attention because we've been trained out of our intuitive intelligence, and we've been trained out of trusting ourselves ultimately. And this where you come into these practices and where you really come into a full embodied horsemanship where you're bringing all parts of yourself to the table, it can be scary, because for as long as you're not overthinking something or analyzing something to the nth degree, you feel like the rest of what's offered to you isn't trustworthy. And so stepping into that framework and going, well, how is it that I'm actually cultivating my emotional intelligence right now? How is it that I'm actually cultivating my intuitive intelligence? And these are all parts of us which we naturally embody. But for the most part, as I keep saying, that logical intelligence is the one that's most nurtured and really most culturally respected. I mean, our educational system, the way we go about things is really very logically and intellectually based. We value intellectual intelligence. We value thought. Emotional intelligence, intuitive intelligence, it's seen as a bit more waffy, a bit less trustworthy. But as soon as we start to segregate those parts of ourselves, then we really start to have a problem, because we're presenting a mismatch to our horse. We're presenting a incongruence, which they pick up on, because they are always completely congruent between what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and they sniff it out in us. And this is really where we have to get on board with this stuff, because as soon as you start to present a mismatch, and let me give you a really a tangible example of that mismatch. A lot of what I work with is anxiety. So a lot of riders that come, anxiety is like their biggest thing, and so common. Like anxiety is not something that we want to get rid of. It's definitely something that serves us, but when it is running out of control, then it's a rubbish place to be. Like it's an incredibly limiting and upsetting emotion to deal with on a regular basis. So what commonly happens is we try not to feel anxious, because there's a shame around feeling anxious, and we know that being anxious with our horses isn't how it is that we need to be in order to create this lovely calm dynamic. And so we present a mismatch. We go in there and we have a facade and we're like, I'm okay. And really behind the scenes, not even very far behind the scenes, we're really not okay. We're really not okay. And so that builds and builds and builds until we're so much not okay that perhaps we feel like we can't even get on, or we can't do what it is that we want to do. This is where the incongruence builds. And what I want to say is that instead of being not okay, instead of actually saying to yourself, I feel like this, but I'm going to pretend I don't feel like this, and let's just kind of squash that down and hope that we kind of get through and survive to the other side. What about if being okay? What about if not being okay is actually a fantastic start point? Because it gives you really valuable information. That anxiety is telling you something, and the more you ignore it, the stronger the message is going to be, until it actually blows through all of the protective mechanisms that you set up and completely immobilizes you. So you have to actually present an honest front, and sometimes that honest front is recognizing what it is that's happening beneath the surface and allowing it to come up so that we can actually deal with it. So the emotional intelligence, or developing your emotional intelligence, involves not suppressing anymore. It's not pretending that you're completely okay when you're not okay, because feeling fearful or feeling anxious or feeling concerned or angry or frustrated, these are really useful emotions if we can take the positive messages from them and then learn how to channel them in an effective way. And so this is the channeling is really the key. The two areas that we go into which upset us and really upset our horses are suppression. So when we pretend and we squash it down and we try to see everything's okay and it's really not okay, and our horses know it's not okay, or we overexpress, where it builds up, and we kind of get to this stage where we're either taking it out on ourselves or other people or our horses, and we're feeling really crap about that as a result too. So that channeling is that learning process of really grounding yourself, of saying, what is it that I need to take from this? How is it that I can utilize that in the best way possible, and then use the energy that that emotion liberates, because all of those emotions liberate a huge amount of energy. Like if you're feeling, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling fearful, that's a huge amount of energy that's liberated in your system. And so you really need to know how to channel and process that in a way that's really effective to you and your horses. It's really exciting. This stuff is really exciting. And as well, if you recognize that you need to embrace the messy imperfection of yourself, and that is all that's required, then how fantastic is that? You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be a Zen Buddha. You just need to be real. You need to be real and actually authentic in what it is that you are. And what I mean by that is have your insides match your outside, you know, have that line up. And I think that we get really dissatisfied with ourselves and frustrated and angry with ourselves when we know that there's a mismatch, you know, when we know that actually what we're presenting is different to what it is that we're feeling. And so in that place, that's where we get stuck, and that's where we fester and things become toxic. And that place is what I'm really interested in working on and developing. So I've put a whole course on that in Joyride, because it's such a it's vital actually to my mind. It's completely vital that we learn how to channel our emotions, that we learn how to process things, and that we develop a level of acceptance around emotions as well, because we've again traditionally been taught about to avoid discomfort in ourselves and avoid discomfort in others. It can be equally as hard to entertain a conversation with someone else who's struggling. It can be equally hard to entertain a conversation with someone who's saying that they feel anxious or fearful or afraid, because we want to fix it. You know, you want to be like, okay, well, it'll be fine. Just get out there. I'm sure it's not going to be as bad as you think. And interestingly, like in some of the threads that I read where someone might say that they've been nervous, while there's also a lot of really support, and this is just generally in public Facebook groups, for instance, whilst there's a lot of supportive people in there, there's equally a number of people that are like, just get on with it type of thing, because we need to be comfortable with discomfort. And that's something that not many of us are. You know, that's something that we really have to allow ourselves to be. I think Brené Brown, she cited a really lovely quote for empathy, which is actually someone else's quote who I can't remember. I'll have to look that up. But basically it's like your ability to be in the dark with someone. So if they're experiencing an emotion that is, you know, classically unpleasant, like how is it that you're able to sit there with them, not fix it or not try and make that better, but how are you able to actually like stay in that place with them to really allow that to be and then come through to the other side. That as well is the basis for really self-compassion as well, or self-empathy when you're going through any kind of challenging emotions. And again, the gift that horses give us is because they really present us with ourselves. You know, if you have stuff going on, it shows up. You can get away with it for a period of time, but as soon as you start to take things to the next level, or as soon as you start to really engage for any sustained period, things show up, because you can't fake it for that long. So the fake it till you make it adage has gone out the window for me as well. It's really about embracing what it is that you want to become now, you know, and that fake it till you make it again creates that distance between you and this result, which is who you should be, when actually it's like, well, what do you need to step into the practice of? What is the smallest version of that you can practice right now? The thing that I've really been enjoying, and that's been so helpful for me as well, is to think of everyday braveness. This is my new thing. I practice everyday braveness. And everyday braveness is not about manning up and kind of plowing through. It's about leaning in and understanding what the brave response would be in any given particular situation. So a brave response might be when you feel shame, or when you get that trigger of like, oh, I just want to run away from this situation, that, you know, actually facing up to it would be the thing to do, or having a conversation rather than retracting and recoiling. That's a brave response. So that's everyday braveness, you know. Deciding to have conversations like this every day is like an example for me of everyday braveness. It's like, let's just get on and talk about this stuff, even if I don't have it perfectly ironed out, as I don't at the moment. So it's, yeah, I'm really thrilled to be able to do this with you. Hey, Chrissy. Oh, there's so many cool comments. I'll make sure that I go back through and have a look at at what you've all said. It sort of cuts them off for me, unfortunately, so I can't quite see what's what. But yeah, I think that's really the fundamentals of it. This now the motivation of everything that I'm producing and everything I'm doing is focusing on this transformation. It's like, how do we maximize the connection? How do we maximize the partnership? How do we ensure that both of us are happy and we are, you know, whatever discipline it is we're in, whether we're competitive or not, you know, regardless of what it is that we want to do, how is it that we can do that in a way that is aligned with our values and that seeks the betterment of ourselves and our horses? Because I really believe that that's possible. I really believe that that's possible. And up until a point, it's been, you know, it's been a very transactional approach, especially when it comes to competition. But the tide is definitely changing in that area. So yeah, it's very cool. So tomorrow, I think we'll get more into talking about processes and practices and how we're going to embody and kind of step into those, which is a lovely thing as well. It's like one of the things I mentioned in Joyride the other day, and this was so cool. I'll actually see if she'll let me post it, but one of my fabulous Joyride members said that her dream was to wear her tails on her horse, like her beautiful coat tails. And I was like, well, you can do that tomorrow. You can do that now. Like, why wait for that? And she posted a picture in the group looking fabulous riding her horse in tails. And it's things like that. You know, we wait, we put things off and we wait till we're better or we're okay. And it comes from, you know, so much of our trepidation or so much of our putting things off comes from needing to feel like we're good enough or needing to feel like we're worthy of doing this thing or producing that result. And your baseline that you start from is that you're worthy now. Like, that is your passport when you're born. You're worthy now and you're good enough now. And that is the baseline. You know, that's your foundation. And from then you really need to just start to understand that all of us have different and beautiful qualities that we bring to the table that are all really necessary and valid and can contribute to the conversation, can contribute to the horsemanship conversation. And so for as long as we're out there really seeking to better ourselves and get the best out of ourselves and to be wholehearted, you know, to be messy and to be imperfect and to be okay with that, then we'll be really accepting of ourselves and we'll be accepting of other people. Because that's the element that we want to develop is this, you know, a community of horse people that are supportive and uplifting of each other. And when that doesn't happen, it's coming from an individual place, you know, because individuals are really what inform the collective. And if we feel like we have an unhealthy collective, then that's just a set of unhealthy individuals, which is what we want to kind of be the opposite of. Fantastic. All right, guys. So thank you for hanging out and joining me. Tomorrow we'll be, talking more about processes and practices, and I'll have a think about how we can venture more into that. I know that I sort of went off on a few different tangents today, and I wasn't quite sure where this conversation or topic was going to take me, but I do think it's a really important one, and I value all of your comments and taking the time to watch. So thank you. If you're interested in exploring it further, come join me in Joyride. It is such a cool place to be, and it's all about what it is we've just talked about. There's a link at the top of this that will set you on your way there, and it would be fantastic to have you be a member. All right, guys, I will be around the same time tomorrow and we'll explore this further. And if you've got any feedback or anything you want to talk about, throw it in because I'm totally open to everything. All right, guys, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.